Hello and welcome to a new podcast from the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. My name is Hussein Askari. Today is August the 9th. Exactly a week ago, the whole world was, anticipating something big to happen when the House Speaker of the United States, Nancy Pelosi, was on the way to Taiwan. And then what that created was a major crisis. We still feel the reverberations of it. The Belt and Road Institute in Sweden is not, we usually don't deal with these political issues, but we have a situation in the world where it's very difficult to ignore such major developments as we have seen with the Ukraine crisis. Actually, all these matters affect the Belt and Road Initiative and economic cooperation among nations. As you see from the map, which we use, that we want to build bridges among nations, that the world is actually a small village in a sense, and the economic and other types of interdependence among nations makes it imperative to ease tensions and show the path to normalization of relations among nations and build based on, of course, the United Nations Charter and other international principles, a method of cooperation among nations and harmony between peoples. So on this whole question of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan and the Chinese reactions, as a result of that, I would like to welcome our special guest, Mr. William Jones from Washington. He's a China and Belt and Road expert, but also a former White House correspondent for the news service Executive Intelligence Review. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks for having me, Hussein.
Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. What I will do just immediately is I will just read a few sentences from the reaction of the Chinese Foreign Minister and State Councilor Wang Yi to this visit. And then I will ask you a number of questions depending on what is mentioned here. He says, this move seriously violates the One China principle. It's important to remember that, the One China principle. Maliciously infringes on China's sovereignty and blatantly engages in political provocations, which has caused strong indignation among the Chinese people and widespread opposition from the international community. The United States should not fantasize about undermining China's development and revitalization. China has found a correct development path in line with its own national conditions. And under the leadership of the Communist Party of China, 1.4 billion people, Chinese people, are striding towards the Chinese-style modernization. We put the development of our country and nation on the basis of our own strength and are willing to coexist peacefully and develop together with other countries. But we will never allow any country to undermine China's stability and development. Then he says, the United States should not fantasize about manipulating geopolitical games. Seeking peace, stability, development, and win-win cooperation are the common aspirations of regional countries. There is one point then I want to stress, he said, the One China principle is the key stabilizing force for peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. And the three China-U.S. joint communications are the real guardrails for peaceful coexistence between China and the United States. Now, there are these three things which I wanted to ask you to explain to our viewers. We have the One China principle. People in the West, we have also the One China policy, but also we have the three communiques between the United States and China. Can you help us figure out the background to the One China policy and what are these three communiques between the United States and China?
Sure. And the three issues are all part of one really package, which we call the One China policy. The history goes back to the Second World War, of course, after the Chinese won a civil war in which they took the government of China in 1949, the remnants of the opposition, the old Republic of China leadership under Chiang Kai-shek, retired with his forces to the island of Taiwan, which was a possession of China, but separated from the mainland by some 130 kilometers. During the course of that war, he was supported logistically by the United States. Prior to that, the U.S. had tried to bring the two sides, the Communist Party forces in the north during World War II and the Kuomintang under Chiang Kai-shek together in a coalition government. But this was never acceptable in its entirety to Chiang Kai-shek. Civil war came, the war was fought. The Chinese Communist Party won a decisive victory in that, and the retirement of the Chiang Kai-shek forces to Taiwan was a strategic retreat. However, the United States made the decision that they would continue to recognize the Republic of China and Chiang Kai-shek as the leader of the country, in spite of the fact that he was isolated on a small, relatively small island, about 20 million people, I guess, you had there. During the whole course of the 1950s, during the Cold War, this was recognized as the representative of China because of U.S. support. Also in the United Nations, they held the seat of the United Nations. Nevertheless, the geographical facts of the matter, a country of at that time half a billion people, could not be ignored. And as the change in the United Nations, with the influx of dozens of independent countries from Africa, Asia, and Latin America, then obviously there was a consensus there that the People's Republic of China should be recognized as the representative of China, and not this island of Taiwan, the so-called Republic of China on the island of Taiwan. So the issue was that China then took that seat. Taiwan, however, had been very active during the course of those 15 years, going all over the world as the representative of China and establishing relations with many countries, including in the developing sector. And of course, you couldn't have this dual representation. And so that the Chinese precondition for establishing relations with these countries was that the countries recognize that they are the Chinese government and not Taiwan. So that in the course of that, I think hundreds, literally 100 at this point, 181 countries, which are recognized by the which have relations with the People's Republic of China, have accepted this one China policy. They do not accept Taiwan as a government. They have relations perhaps with Taiwan, economic and otherwise, but there is no official representation. The United States came shortly after the recognition in the United Nations, which the United States did not support, but it did not veto, or did not veto, because it was a realization that this was something that had to come. And at the point that the United States finally decided, and it had been discussed already during the Kennedy administration, of recognizing the People's Republic of China, but the assassination of the president put that off until 72. Nixon did it, and the precondition, of course, was the same as the precondition for all the other countries, that the United States recognized that the PRC is the government of China and that Taiwan is a part of China. And they did sign this. And in the Nixon visit, you had the longer first communique, which asserted this issue. And then when relations, several years later, official relations were established between the United States and China in 1979, you had the second communique, which was much shorter, but said very clearly that the United States recognizes only one China. It does not recognize one China, or it does not recognize two Chinas, nor does it recognize one China and one Taiwan. Very explicit. The third communique came during the Reagan administration, a really kind of an upgrading of the relationship with China. And it said specifically with regard to the sale of weapons to Taiwan, which did continue even after the United States. They removed their forces from Taiwan at the point that Nixon decided to establish relation with the PRC, but they continued to sell weapons to the Taiwanese. Congress, which was not terribly happy with all of this, there was a very strong, at that time, more so today, a very strong Taiwan lobby. And this was not only influence, this was also money. And congressmen need money to get elected. And that is the power that the Taiwan lobby has. Perhaps the most powerful lobby. It's up for grabs whether the Israelis have a greater lobby than Taiwan, but it's big. Yeah. And so that they opposed that. They couldn't oppose the agreement because that was a decision of the executive branch. But nevertheless, they said, we will continue to sell weapons to Taiwan to the extent that they're needed to defend themselves if they would be attacked by China. China had made the agreement also that they were not going to have a forcible reunification of Taiwan, that it would be a peaceful reunification unless and until Taiwan declared independence. And that was also part of the agreement. So that but the weapons to Taiwan, continued weapons, were always a bone of contention, but they were not a deal breaker. Mm-hmm. And up until recently, there was a calculation: how many weapons does Taiwan really need to defend itself? Now it's somewhat like what you got with Ukraine. They're making an attempt to send in, everything and that they can, which is also becoming a big problem. So that at the point, but the Pelosi visit was really key because the U.S. government had made a commitment. And it's been reiterated as late as at the highest level by the discussion between President Xi and President Biden, the reaffirmation of the One China policy. And yet Pelosi, who is not merely a congressman, but is a member of the U.S. government, and therefore as Speaker of the House, and therefore must adhere to U.S. policy, broke with that in terms of making a visit, which in all respects was treated as an official visit by the Taiwanese, as well as by the Pelosi delegation. And that became a deal breaker because it meant, and of course, everybody knew that this was going to be a serious problem. The Pentagon weighed in. They indicated, we don't think it's a good time to go, given the tremendous tensions that have developed over the last few years with China. The White House also, in their own way, seemed to make it clear that they were not in favor of that, but they took the decision that Congress is an independent arm of government, and therefore, they have the right to do it. That could have been stopped. I mean, I don't take that seriously because they got a military plane that could have been stopped by the executive branch. And the money from the Congressional Budget Office could also have been stopped from the executive side. Nevertheless, it went on for political reasons, and everybody was just, gearing in, tightening up and saying what's going to happen here. Right. And it did happen. The Chinese have indicated exactly what they could do if they really wanted to do in terms of preserving the sovereignty of the nation by defending Taiwan. By surrounding Taiwan. Yeah. So that caused a major furor, and that has been a point where trust has to a large extent been broken, and the measures that the Chinese have taken in withdrawing military.
That was my next question: is how do you see the reaction by the Chinese? I mean, whether Pelosi's visit was a reckless, political gimmick or a calculated move to stir a strategic major crisis between these two major powers.
This was obvious. I don't know if it was in Pelosi's calculations herself, but obviously, given the support it was getting from Mike Pompeo and the whole raft of Republican anti-China hawks, there is an indication that maybe they wanted that to happen. I think there were a lot of people especially in the Biden administration, who were concerned that something like that might happen. They would have to react to it. But I think it was also, I mean, some people were saying that they will use this as a pretext to invade and simply take Taiwan. And even some reactions from, some Chinese friends, they were, very happy. Well, now's the time we should do it because, they blew it. They gave us the lead. They didn't do that. I think it was a very premeditated and thought through action, which is not over yet. Of course, we had the live fire actions. They ended when they said they would end it in Sunday, but the maneuvers are still ongoing, and they might be they indicated might be a more semi-permanent situation for China in order to defend against this attempt to pull Taiwan away. So we don't know exactly what it's going to do, but the thing I think they have secured is international support because of the fact that Pelosi did this. Mm-hmm. Everybody knew that this was like going to be like a hand grenade. That although there may be people who are concerned about the reaction of China and what they will do next, I think there's general support that they are not the problem here. The problem here is the United States and U.S. policy. And we have seen also most recently on Blinken's trip to Africa to try and convince Africans not to work with China, that he's really been rebuffed on this. I mean, South Africa in particular, and in other places.
Yeah, Egypt and many other countries actually made statements. Their leadership made statements that they adhere to the policy, the One China principle and policy, and this became very clear. But I think some people. I also talked to some Chinese people, and some of them, of course, like you said, this is an opportunity, but others said, look, we think with reason rather than emotions. And you can see, although the official reactions are very angry, but as I read from the quote, is that China is always open for harmony, economic cooperation, and win-win cooperation, because we have reached a point where although the United States trying to push Africans or Europeans to stop working with China, decouple from China, it's almost impossible economically for the United States to cut its ties to China. There's so much interdependent. I remember, I'm going to just read this, when the Corona pandemic broke out in around March, there was a hearing in the U.S. Congress, and Mark Milley, the Joint Chiefs chairman, he was asked, how much are we dependent on China when it comes to medical equipment and medicine? He said, and I will quote, he said, we have got a military medical system, and we have the same access to all the drugs that are available in the commercial system. He means the army, the military, etc. You rightly pointed out that it is a vulnerability to have a country such as China manufacturing high percentages. I don't know if it is 97%, 98%, or 80%, whatever it is, but I do know it is a high percentage of the ingredients to the American pharmaceutical industry across the country, both military and civilian. Now, here you have the head of the American forces saying, look, 97% of our medicine, including medicines, go and vaccines and antibiotics that our military forces use, come from China. Now, of course, there are all the other aspects. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, how much the U.S. is dependent on trade with China for supplies.
Well, this is the linchpin of the relationship, and this is something that cannot be really upset by political decision making without upsetting the entire U.S. economy. The idea that they're going to build new supply chains and cut China out, and this is all ridiculous. The productivity, prices, are determined by this international division of labor in which China and the U.S. are very closely entwined. And any attempt to turn that around is going to upset all of these factors: production, productivity, prices. Look at the inflation going on because of an attempt to get Russia out of the game. I mean, this is ridiculous. And it's a political limit, because if you do have these economic consequences, you have people in the streets ready to hang their congressman in the nearest tree, and nobody can afford it. That's the reality, right? Now the rest of the stuff is really largely fluff, but it could be problematic. But that's the linchpin, and that's not going to go away. And even in terms of somebody asked the question recently from the Chinese press about what's going to happen on the economic front, trade front, in response to the Pelosi visit and the implications. And my answer was that there probably won't be an economic response on this thing, because even the Treasury Department is saying now that they have to lower the tariffs on China in order to bring down this inflation. And it's becoming almost impossible at this point. Price of gasoline, price of energy, everything. And the so-called inflation bill that they passed, $300 billion for inflation to build, solar panels and stuff like this. This is not going to. It's not going to be an inflation reduction bill. It's going to increase it. So it's only in this way, by dealing with the tariffs and everything like that, and trying to stabilize the relationship with China, that the country can move forward at all. Otherwise, it's going to remain very, very chaotic. And how soon our politicians will get the message is hard to say. But like, even in the administration now, there's a discussion that maybe the tariff policy is off track. The other parts of the relationship are much more difficult. I can see them coming back, but at the moment they're kind of in flux as a result of the Chinese measures, cutting off the mill-to-mill relationship in particular, which I'm sure the Pentagon, Milley, and others are very concerned about, and I'm sure they're going to try and figure out a way of putting that back together. At the moment, I think that the ball is in the U.S. court. How they react after the Chinese manifestation is going to be very key, and the Chinese have said that clearly, that they still want a good relationship with the U.S., but that they've got to see action in terms of the support for the one China policy. There's been indications of a sort where, the Congress, of course, is all in a fluff, and they're passing all these legislations against China. It looks as if the administration is not prepared to sign on to this stuff. So again, sending a signal that maybe enough is enough on this. But it's still in flux right now, so it's hard to say, how that's going to pan out ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen a certain collapse of the supply chains when the corona outbreak took place, and we have a chaotic situation in the world. We have a similar situation with regards to Russia-Europe relationship, because there's so much dependence on Russian gas. We have also international dependence on Russian fertilizer and so on. But at the same time, politicians keep pushing the same policy when it has not worked. And therefore, there is at some point, either we have a total, hopefully not, a massive confrontation, or we will have to repair this relationship. Now, the question here is, how is it possible to repair that relationship? Starting with cooperation on infrastructure projects. Of course, we have these ideas being thrown out. Like you said, Blinken is in Africa to propose things for Africans and not to work with China. We have the Build Back Better World, which was floated last year in the G7. Then we had the Global Infrastructure Initiative and all these things. And the intention is to block China and block the Belt and Road. The thing is that this is counterproductive, because if you build infrastructure and development around the world, this will benefit China too. It will benefit the Belt and Road. But trying to put sticks in the wheels or in the machinery, this is completely counterproductive. And many nations are now realizing that this is really a lot of talk and very little work. And therefore, the Belt and Road has attracted more than 140 nations. And therefore, it is a sign of success, if you want a sign. But there is all these countermeasures against China. But how do you see this relationship, being repaired? I mean, I know you have done a lot of research on the history of U.S.-Chinese relations. We had already Benjamin Franklin studying Confucius, advocating Confucian governance ideas in the United States in the early years of the U.S. Republic. We had the cooperation between Franklin and Roosevelt, for example, and the Chinese during the fight in World War II. But Franklin Roosevelt also had ideas how to deal with Russia and China after World War II. But these, of course, did not materialize. Do you think that this idea of economic cooperation, the Belt and Road, can bring the United States and China and other major powers in the world together to have a more peaceful coexistence?
Well, theoretically, that's possible, and it was an indication in the beginning of the Belt and Road, even during the Obama administration, that the Chinese wanted to talk, and they did talk with people at the State Department with regard to how the United States could fit into the Belt and Road policy and work together with it. And this unfortunately didn't pan out. And then since then, of course, you had the Trump trade tariffs, and things have gone to hell in a handbasket in terms of U.S. China relationship. So we're not at that point even anymore. What I think is that the United States will have to start doing something in terms of infrastructure development. I'm skeptical that this Inflation Reduction Act, which has been renamed from the Big Back Better bill to inflation reduction, will do anything. I don't think that the United States is going to have a lot of funding in terms of economic development. Look what happened over the last 40 years. I mean, there was a development policy after Roosevelt. There was an attempt to industrialize, countries in Africa, probably going up until the Kennedy administration. There was still something very much alive. From the 1970s, it was all gone. It was downhill. And most of the countries have suffered as a result. In fact, some countries were very well off in the beginning of the 70s, and they got worse, as time went on because of the change of the terms of trade and manipulation, all that stuff. So the U.S. has not had a competent development policy, and no longer at the moment has the means of doing that. We no longer have the kind of governmental apparatus to set into motion, like building a transcontinental railroad or something like that. We could get those back, and there's discussion about that in terms of bringing back industrial policy, which has been a dirty word, for the last 20 or 30 years. And that might accomplish something, but having a major, effect in Africa or Latin America from the United States point of view, I don't think is going to happen. What you will happen, of course, and what you have had is a support for the Belt and Road Initiative. That is going to go forward. That's not going to stop. I don't think the measures that the United States is trying to impose on that in terms of the technology, we call technological apartheid, preventing them from having the most modern semiconductors and things like that. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, in fact, there are indications now. Even the New York Times had an article, kind of chiding the United States on this so-called semiconductor alliance issue, that the Chinese are already working on some of the most high-level semiconductors now already in Shenzhen and other places, so that they may be already there yet. So don't try stop them. But politically, this becomes a problem. I think the Chinese can deal with this. We see that, Wang Yi today had a 4-hour discussion or more with the South Korean foreign minister. They're being played also because he's conservative. He didn't meet with Pelosi though. I mean, he didn't want to burn his bridges towards China, and obviously they want to keep a good relationship with them. And so that some of this, the so-called semiconductor alliance is also a discussion that the Chinese are expressing their own concerns that it's trying to cut them out. So I think you have the politically, uh, ironically, because of the Pelosi visit, you probably have a stronger support for the attitude of China in this respect. That is to try and move forward on the Belt and Road, to try and create harmony, create good relations between countries. They don't like the idea of joining an alliance, especially an alliance aimed against China. And even the Europeans, I mean, you had this G7 statement. The Chinese reacted. Wang Yi said it's just a worthless piece of paper. You can throw it in the trash. Right? Nevertheless, the individual countries, the reaction from Germany was not quite as strong as that. They said, no, we want to have, a peaceful resolution of this whole situation, which is fine. So it indicates that everybody is not on board here, not even all of the allies. So that the Chinese position, I think, is very, sane and is the way to go, showing the strength that they do have in this, but at the same time, having the olive branch to tell people, we've got to start working together. We've got to, understand the rules of the road and move forward together. I think that's going to ultimately be victorious. I don't think Blinken can undercut that to any great respect, probably even in Europe now. The Italian situation is also up in arms, and because of the restrictions on the Russians, you've had now, I think, 3 elections already in Estonia and a couple of other countries because of the reaction of this thing in Europe. So that there's a lot going for them now in staying the course and moving diplomatically to all these countries to get the support that they need, and I think they do have in pursuing the kind of policies represented by the Belt and Road. It'll take a while for the United States to understand fully that somehow there's got to be cooperation in this. But I think that their attempts to sabotage it are going to really go nowhere. And at a certain point, they've got to see it's in their interest also to get the economy moving. But like I said, you've got the economic linchpin is not going to disappear. I think that's going to continue pretty closely. And I think there will be attempts to renew the relationships at a certain level, like in terms of the mill-to-mill relations. The United States, I think they're probably now track 2 discussions or attempts to get a track 2 discussion going at a less than governmental level because the relationships are broken, in order to figure out how do we get this back into place. I think the military wants it. I think the administration ultimately wants it. And I think it will be coming in spite of the difficulty of the present situation. But that's my hope and my guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that this is quite comforting to hear that, because there has been so much tension and so much, prophecies of horrible things happening and wars and world war. I mean, it's really scary that people talk about Third World War or nuclear confrontation as if it is like a commonplace discussion these days. But that's really, people have to really realize the enormous the horror that lies behind that, and that this is not a solution. That as you have pointed out now, that we have only one way to go to secure a peaceful world, and this is through economic cooperation, respect of the United Nations Charter, and win-win cooperation. So I think through your work with the Schiller Institute, and I myself have worked with the Schiller Institute many years to develop the ideas for the Eurasian land bridge, the world land bridge, which you see, which is a concept which was brought up by the Schiller Institute. But there is a campaign in the United States to launch or ignite a new world economic order based on these concepts. If you may let us know about some details of it.
Yeah, look, this is important for people to understand because the official policy is so much dominated by British ideology that this idea that we are an empire who've taken over from the British. As after World War II, of course, Franklin Roosevelt died, and there was an influx of British, ideology into the United States under the Truman. The role of Churchill was, of course, key in that. And it has taken over the institutions by and large. Um, Nevertheless, the traditions of the United States, traditions stemming from Quincy Adams and Franklin Roosevelt, are still a part of history, a part of our history. And people who study these things see also what is going, the difference in this. And I think the undercurrents is you have a lot of reaction against. There was a recent book that I read, it's 800 pages, called "A Legacy of Violence," which is the history of the British Empire. I've never seen anything so dire. I've never seen a script so dire as here. It's like the British Empire. There is no upside to it. There never was. And people just don't realize. Now, this is a historian from Harvard University, a Pulitzer Prize winner for another work, exposing the insanity of the British Empire. At the same time, you've got these people like Niall Ferguson and all these British intellectuals coming into the U.S. institutions saying, yes, the U.S. should be the follower of Britain. So there is this debate, there is this understanding that the British Empire, the idea of empire, is evil and always has been. The question is how to bring this to the surface. I believe that's the case in, even among many of the political elites in the U.S. who have been opposed. I mean, who have reacted to this Pelosi visit, in a more or less rational way. That this has got to come to the fore because within the population, that is the case. They're not the U.S. population, not a gaggle of British imperialists, right? We don't have that here. We have an entirely different tradition, but it has to come to the fore. So it's a matter of bringing it out, of explaining to the Americans what's going on, because the media is so totally, controlled that they're just not getting any information. The second is to get them to move on this new understanding, to light a fire under the rears of their politicians, or to elect new politicians. We have some people, like in the state of New York, who are Diane Sayre, who is moving to try and unseat very important congressman who's very close to Pelosi, Chuck Schumer. And so we'll see how these things go. But the totality of that is that there are things in motion within the United States because of the dire situation that most Americans are facing today, which is getting worse and not better. And I think Biden will take a hit in November, and you'll get a lot of new people in. A lot of them will be crazy, but it's a situation in flux, and that means that it's not a solid front there. It's something that's moving, and the idea is that what the Schiller Institute is trying to do on this front is to try and shape public opinion on the basis of reason, as Lyndon LaRouche, we all both knew so well, tried to do. And since 100th anniversary now, there's going to be a conference on that in September, and I think that will also help provide. It was really one of the last Rooseveltians in terms of the political. There were a few other people still around. That generation is really gone, and he was one of the last ones, but very active until his last days. But in the population as a whole, that tradition still exists. There's something there that just has to be called forth on the basis of reality, and then this will become a force in the United States. And I think that's really the one hope that we have of changing that situation, and everything else will, I think, fit into place. Right?
Right. Yeah, no, the thing is that, some people are advocating the idea that there's a new world order, but the United States and Europe are not in that new world order. It's Russia, China, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and probably India. Right? This does not really solve the problem. It will just divide the world further. The best possible solution is if we, as you say, if the people in the United States and Europe realize that they're ending geopolitics, what you call the British geopolitics, and turning to economic cooperation, cultural cooperation, people to people kind of understanding, that would be a perfect situation to end all these insane crises that are engulfing the world right today. So anyway, thank you very much, William Jones, joined us from Washington today. Your valuable time and insights to share with our audience.
Thank you very much, Hassan. It's great to be here.
Thank you very much.